I wanted to share a story about a new client that came in and said, Nathan, I really have to retire. I think I saved enough, but I'm not quite sure. I'm 60 years old. I've got $1.6 million saved up in retirement accounts and joint accounts. I'm completely burned out at work. I love my job, but I really do not like the stress that it gives me in order to be able to do that job. And this conversation is not unlike many of the conversations that I have with other clients. And so I wanted to share that conversation with you, go over the financial planning software that I utilized with him and with my other clients so that you can also see, because I feel like there's a lot of similarities here. Let's go ahead and just jump right into this conversation so that we can have a look together. Let me introduce you to the Sample family. We've got Jake Sample, who is 60 years old and a senior vice president at a bank. He is married to Maria Sample, who is a homemaker, and they live in Texas right now. They've got 2 kids and 1 grandson that they love spending as much time as they can with. And when they came with me, they said their main priority was retirement planning. Do we have enough to retire right now? And that was one of the key things that we wanted to answer with them. But we also talked a little bit about what their core values were. What did they want to do in retirement? And that was they wanted to spend as much time in Florida with their kids and grandkids. They wanted to travel the world. They had gone to a new country every single year. So that is part of where their expenses are going. And that's important to them. For Jake, he wanted to understand his investments a little bit better, minimize taxes, and continue to give to charity. Where Maria wanted to manage the budget so that they did not run out of money. So that is what their core priorities were when we started having a conversation. We then went to their net worth. What did they have as far as assets? So Jake had $1.3 million in his 401k. They have $300,000 in a taxable account. Their home is worth $750,000. They have 2 cars. And then he had a car loan of $12,000 left. As far as what they had left on their mortgage, they had $225,000 in which they refinanced 3 years ago and are at 3%. They have a Ford F-150 loan of only $12,000 since he put a big chunk down, but there is that loan that he wants to also pay off as well. So Jake has a salary of $250,000, and the other income that they're going to receive in retirement is their Social Security. So it's projected right now that he's going to receive $42,000 at age 67, which is his full retirement age, and then she's going to receive a spousal benefit of $23,000. So let's take a look at their current living expenses. So their current living expenses are around $80,000 a year, and what's included here is anything that's not included below, which are the liability payments for their car and mortgage, which is $4,500 for their car and around $12,000 a year for their mortgage. But eventually these will go away, allowing a higher cash flow. And then we have their other expenses here. So they want to buy a car every 8 years or so, adjusted for inflation, so that has to be in here. They give around $12,000 a year to charity. They have property taxes of $14,000, which is pretty high because they live in Texas. They have yearly travel spending needs of $15,000 because they do love going to all the countries that they've enjoyed going for the past decade. So that's really not going to stop now just for the fact that they are retired. In fact, they want to continue to do that until he's around 80 and she's 78. They feel like they have some pretty good years left that they can continue to do that. If he were to retire early, they would need private insurance, which would cost around $8,500 each. And then when they turn 65, we'll notice that this goes down when Medicare kicks in. And then, of course, you have federal taxes and state taxes, which are zero in Texas. And so we're going to take all this information and we're going to run it through a cash flow analysis, which is going to take all the expenses It's going to take their investments and it's going to start to draw down and see if they can actually retire. But before we do that, we're going to take a look at their savings. And Jake is saving 10% of his salary in a 401k, and he's got an employer match of 5%. So now let's take a look at the cash flow together. So right away, we see here all those expenses are added up, and we have their income that is coming in, and we notice pretty quickly that in the current scenario, they cannot retire doing the things that they want to do at this exact moment in time. They do run out of money. So let's take a closer look at why. And so if he were to retire, and we're going to ignore this first line because it's half of a year. So this is when he retires. They're going to have no income, as you can see here, but when he turns 67, he is going to start Social Security, and then she is going to follow up pretty quickly when she turns 67. So now we have income flows here. Planned distributions are basically RMDs coming out of his retirement account. So this leaves total inflows, and then we have total expenses here. But what are total expenses? I mean, these are pretty high numbers. We have 158, 161, 200,000. So let's double click into total expenses. So let's take a look at their living expenses. As we can see, we have $80,000 a year plus inflation, so that's going to continue to go up. We have their liability payments. So this is their car plus their mortgage. So as their car goes away, they only have their mortgage. But as you can see here, their mortgage eventually goes down to zero. Then we have their other expenses. So let's take a look at that. Their other expenses include the charitable giving, the private insurance, Medicare. It includes new cars every 8 years. It has property taxes. There's yearly travel for the next 20 years. And they add all of this up and you get the total expense flow. So there you have the other expenses here. And then now we have taxes paid. So if you are taking money out of your retirement account, that has not been taxed yet, along with some of that Social Security benefits are going to be taxed as well. So you have the total expenses on this far column. So these are the total amount of money that they're going to need to take out of their accounts in order to continue to live their lifestyle. And as we see, we actually have their accounts growing by 7.4% in a pre-retirement way, and then we dial that back to around a 6.56% annualized return because their portfolio is still going to grow even though they're taking money out. So in this first year, we have $1.6 million of their retirement, and that will continue to go down because their net cash flow is coming out. So their net cash flow is how much money are they pulling from their retirement. And the question really becomes, can their investments last long enough to allow the pulling of their net cash flow to spin down through both their lives? And you see pretty quickly that they can't do it. And in fact, they run out of money at 76. So they run out of money pretty quickly at the age of 76. So this doesn't really help them that much, right? They came to me and said, how can I retire? I'm pretty tired. And so what they wanted was to understand their options. And so this is where we went into the decision-making center and really started to play around with the what-if scenarios. So let's take a look at that now. So as you can see here, this shows that they run out of money, much like what we said. But they do have some options, right? They have $1.6 million in investments, so they can spend less. He can retire later. They can move in retirement. So they have a couple different options here. So let's take a look here. If they were to retire right now and move to Florida, what is that going to do? You're actually going to see a pretty big increase in their ability to save some money here, because what's happening is they sell their house for $750,000 and they buy a $500,000 house in Florida. What that does is it gets rid of their mortgage altogether. So now it freed up $12,000 a year in cash flow. So they didn't need to pull out an additional $12,000. What else did it do? Florida property taxes are significantly cheaper than Texas. So they're also going to save money there. So right away, we see a big increase in their net value gained. It doesn't quite get them to age 90, in which they wanted to see for the end of the analysis. So we had to do a couple other things. We could change their living expenses. So we could say, if we just did $5,000 less a year in spending, could we do that? That's less than $500 a month difference. So in this example, that actually does get them there and gives them plenty of future dollars. So the ability to downsize, move to Florida, spend less money, they can actually do it. But what happens if they didn't want to spend more money and he wanted to retire? That actually is about the same, or actually gives them a little bit more money. And the question is why? When we take a look at what it means to retire a year later, we're going to notice that there is some extra green here. And that's because they are ultimately taking less money from their portfolio, or in this case, they're not taking any money from their portfolio for one extra year. And not only that, they are adding money into their portfolio. So he is putting money in his 401k for another year. That's one less year of private insurance. And there's a company match in their 401k. So there's a lot of things that are being additive to their plan. So he has the option to say, if I just worked one more year, could I continue to have the same exact lifestyle that I want right now? And the answer here is yes. What I actually want to do here, though, is I want to show you the present value, because that takes all of the inflation out and it shows you what their current present value of their money is. So that they would gain $942,000 in today's dollars if they were to do that. What I want to caution you with is sometimes when you use static numbers, we are assuming the 6.56% gains in his portfolio, but we know that the market doesn't actually go up 6.56% every single year. There's years in which it goes up 20%, there's years in which it goes up 5%, there's years in which it goes down 10% or down 20%. So we're going to take a look at a Monte Carlo simulation. And what this is it takes their portfolio and it back tests it against 1,000 different iterations. And then it will stack rank them in order of the best to worst. And it's going to pull out different markers for us to understand. So in the 80th percentile marker, it will show us what the odds are and how much money are left. So in this example, actually, if the markets do phenomenally well in the 80th percentile, they can make it happen. But there's very little chance of that happening, right? 21% in this example. If it's at the 50%, they run out of money at age 80 and 78. So we're going to, again, show them moving to Florida if they wanted to do that. And this bumps them up to 47%. Then if we had them retire at age 62, it bumps them up to 67%. So here we're starting to get a little bit better numbers, and what's really holding us back is the bottom 20th percentile. Now that's no way to always assume the worst case scenario for the remainder of their lives, especially when the market does okay over that time period, over a long period of time. So we want to just see, well, okay, if they then also reduce their spending, that really does a much better job of getting them to a much higher probability of success. So in that worst case scenario. Now, what this does is it just gives us more information. After looking at this, these are pretty static numbers. We understand as humans that we can put up guardrails and say, if the market has done very well, let's do that $15,000 trip this year. If the market is down, maybe we do a $5,000 trip, or we do something with the kids in Florida. So you're allowed to put up different guardrails that allow you for flexible spending. I think if we look at one thing on financial planning, it's that it's a living plan. Life changes. Life is going to look a little bit different in the next decade than it does right now. Priorities are going to change. Health may change. And we may want to consider that. And we may also want to think about buying long-term care insurance. So that might be something that we should also think about, which is a cost. So that might also bring down the percentage if we are paying a certain amount of premiums every year to cover us for an event. So ultimately, what we wanted to do is just share with them what they could do, because Jake, at the end of the day, liked his job. He liked his boss, he liked his colleagues, he liked the work he was doing, but he just wanted the option to say, if I retire now, what do I need to do to make sure that I do not run out of money? And so we built a plan that said, you've ultimately done a great job of saving. You've got $1.6 million. And can we tweak some of your expenses so that you do not run out of money in retirement, right? That was one of Maria's priorities. And so tracking expenses all of a sudden became a little bit higher of a priority and turned into one of the things that we're working on together. And he ultimately decided to continue to work for one more year because he still liked his job and he wanted to continue to do that. But what he also just really wanted to know is, in that worst case scenario, if he stopped working right now, did he have enough? And as you can see here, the plan really does show us that if he does the right things moving forward, if he tracks his expenses, he can have the confidence that he needs to retire. It's really just about understanding what you want to do and then mapping out the plan to get you there. If you found that this was helpful, feel free to drop a comment or subscribe to my channel, as I am going to be creating other scenarios that some of my other clients and some of the other even conversations that I have with prospective clients are asking me on an ongoing basis, and I'd love to be able to share them with you directly.